Really seriously, if I were the governor, running for governor, and you were interviewing me and you said to me, Jim, what are you going to do about the state budget? Here's what my answer would be. What I am going to do is the very first year of my gubernatorial sitting in that chair, I am going to declare a total moratorium on all legislation, which numbers about 3,000 to 4,000 bills a year, a total moratorium for a whole year, except if we're dealing with legislation that deals with the public safety. What do you think of doing something like that, Gary?
Well, something like that needs to happen, because the problem is that the more the legislature sits, the more they have to find a justification for their existence, and the more that people can find some sort of advantage in advancing this little personal agenda or that one, the more they see it as being helpful to their political careers. And it seems to me that we've really lost sight of the reason that legislatures were put into place. I don't think that anyone ever figured that we certainly need a governing body that is going to opine on what the state mineral should be. More likely, we all knew that at some point you need some sort of rules, boundaries for public health, education, and safety. That's really what people should be dealing with. They should not be messing around in these little micro issues that simply run up regulations and burden everyone's existence.
Carol, Business 101 teaches us, in fact, this could even be 99A, it's that low a level, that you cannot spend more than you take in. I mean, it's pretty fundamental, right? No matter how sophisticated you are, if you don't have enough money, you don't spend it. What do you think, I mean, seriously and specifically, what do you think it's going to take to change the paradigm that they operate with, which the spending always exceeds the income? What do you think it's going to take?
Well, first of all, it's going to take a reform of the budget process, just for starters.
Like?
Well, did you realize that in Connecticut, the politicians get together and decide how much they want to spend before they even know how much is available to be spent? Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, families can't budget that way. Government shouldn't be able to budget that way either. This year, there were also failures of the two T's, timing and transparency. As we know, the legislature had been convened since January.
Right.
And yet, here they are in the waning hours of the regular legislative session, the leaders of just one party, the majority party, in secret, writing a budget, which they then presented and jammed through the legislature without any time for public debate or comment. It seems to me that's no way to do the people's business.
But you know what, though, Carol? The thing that gets to me is this, is that what you've just stated, okay, in addition to being the obvious, and I only use that word because it's been going on so long.
Right.
The Democrats huddle together. If it's a Democratic governor, he huddles with them or she huddles with them, and the Republicans are out to lunch, right? And when I'm saying that affectionately, they're literally out to lunch because they're not getting the information, even though they provided a budget. And what happened to them was 5 hours before the clock struck midnight, they saw that book, right? So what is it that people in Connecticut do? I can't believe that people in Connecticut wanted the second largest tax increase in 4 years, right? Number one.
Well,
number
the
two.
second largest increase in history.
In history, and
that's 4 years after the largest.
Senator Len Fasano from North Haven, who's the Senate Minority Leader, the Republican Senate Minority Leader, is saying 4 years from now, the Office of Fiscal Analysis is predicting that we're going to have another $2 billion surplus. So deficit. So what's new?
Well, you know, that's what's concerning. And what really is infuriating, Jim, is the fact that a lot of the politicians in Hartford don't seem to understand that tax policy is dynamic. It isn't static. So what they do is they figure out how much more taxes they can impose on the rest of us without realizing that the tax choices they make are going to have consequences, and many of those consequences are going to act to reduce the revenues they can expect, because people will leave, businesses will close, things will happen that will prevent these high taxes from bringing in the revenue that they're supposed to. And you know, it's, again, as you said, even below Economics 101, below Economics 99A. The fact is, the more you tax anything, the less of it you get. And that's not just true for cigarettes. That's also true for businesses and jobs and the most affluent taxpayers, whom, as we know, are the most mobile segment of society and who can very easily take whatever business they're doing and take it down to Florida for 6 months and a day.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, on the revenue side of the ledger, Carol, I think the number is something like 40 to 50% of all revenue comes out of Fairfield County. And during the last 4 years, or actually prior 4 years, there was a lot of job loss in New York, right? And a lot of the people in Connecticut work in New York in that county, and the revenue went like this. Well, you know what? When the revenue goes down, you're supposed to hold your spending down. But the specific question that I'm asking you, Carol, what do you think it's going to take for people to wake up and say, this madness cannot continue?
Well, I don't know. You know, you hate to catastrophize, but the thing is, you look at what's happened in Illinois, and you look at what's happened other places, and what you don't want is for Connecticut to face the very real prospect of bankruptcy, for people to finally get serious and realize that we cannot have this pie-in-the-sky type spending. And what's particularly infuriating is that they completely busted the spending cap without any kind of regard. And as you know, the spending cap was put into place right after the income tax,
right,
with about 80% approval of the people, because people knew the tendency that politicians have. The more money they get, the more spending they get, and then it all gets out of control. And so what the politicians did this year, they took $1.8 billion in spending out from under the spending cap. And, you know, the spending cap was a very reasonable acknowledgement that the amount of spending government does has to be tied to the growth in state revenues.
You know, it's interesting. The only reason I'm smiling, Carol, is there's an old sports analogy, right? That when you're losing and you can't win, change the rules.
Yes.
Well, that's what they're doing with that spending cap.
Yes.
You know, they say the spending cap is there, like they're feeding us political pablum, right? The spending cap is there to prevent us from, okay, well, they'll change it. They'll raise it, they'll change the rules, they'll move it out from under, and here we go again. Carol, I'm here to tell you, I think I'm right. Although there's been change in governors, Republican and Democrat governors, there has not been a change in that legislature in terms of control for the past 40 years, I think it is, right? So history definitely repeats itself, right? And the Hartford Courant, right, which is not known, Carol, as the most conservative paper in history, right,
no.
comes up with a lead editorial that says it didn't work last time, meaning 4 years ago, when you raised the taxes, the highest in Connecticut history, here we are again, now it's the second highest. What makes you think it's going to work for the third time? And the answer that they gave themselves in the editorial is, it isn't. It isn't, Carol. So the bottom line to me is that unless we change the people in that legislature, it ain't gonna change. And Carol, honestly, I'm not a cynical person. I really am not. And I'm not a fatalist, but I see no evidence that the state of Connecticut's population has any proclivity to change the people that are in the legislature.
Well,
do you?
Well, I think in fairness, you look at the numbers in the legislature, and over just the last few years, the number of Republicans in, I believe it's the House, have gone from something like 37 to 63.
Yeah, they picked up some seats.
They're within 12 of taking control of the House, and they're not really that far off from taking control of the Senate. And as you know, the Yankee Institute is a nonpartisan organization, but I think you can say that when almost any political party has been in unchallenged control for 40 years, what you end up with are political operatives who are arrogant, sclerotic, and entitled.